Welcome to this video on the top 10 caitiff vampires from the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. Every society has its cast-offs, its undesirables, its untouchables, its lumpen. Vampires are no different. The word caitiff is not random, nor is it complimentary. Caitiff refers to a captive, a coward, someone who is wretched or despicable. Likewise, the caitiff are considered wretched among vampires because they have no clan of their own. Whatever embrace was inflicted on them was flawed. Most princes do not suffer caitiff in their domain, and they are forced to exist on the margins of vampire society, claiming whatever space they can before a stronger vampire chases them off. In the game Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you meet a host of caitiff thin-bloods forced out to Santa Monica Pier by the proper Camarilla vampires. It's small wonder then that caitiff occasionally take refuge with the Anarchs, or even the Sabbat, for the promise of some kind of equal treatment. But the scorn and abuse heaped on the caitiff has another origin. One of the prophecies of Gehenna states that a sign of the end times is the proliferation of vampires of thin blood, and those who are not identifiable as having any clan. Now, the official Camarilla policy is that Gehenna is a myth and the antediluvians, if they ever existed at all, are long dead. But some princes follow the logic of Pascal's wager and ask, why risk it? And occasionally send the sheriff or the scourge to massacre their caitiff subjects. But without further ado, here are the top 10 caitiff vampires. Number 10. Albin. The caitiff Albin was born in Saxony, less than a day's ride from the capital city of Magdeburg. When he was a small child, he caught the mumps. Albin survived the illness but was left small and frail for his age. His father showed him no pity and routinely mocked Albin for his stature and weakness. When Albin was 13, a plague ravaged his village, killing his mother, brothers, and sisters. Only he and his father were left alive, and his father was so weakened that he was unable to care for himself, or more importantly, defend himself. Albin tortured his father as his father had done to him for years, and after years of secret torment, Albin stabbed his father to death and set fire to their family home. With his father dead and burned, Albin left his village for the big city of Magdeburg, but the city was as unkind to him as his own home had been. Work was scarce, and Albin took to thievery and hiding in the cellars and cesspits of Magdeburg. When larger, stronger boys found his hiding places, they would chase him with their fists, clubs, and loose pieces of stone. One night, Albin made the mistake of standing up for himself against the boys, stabbing one of them in the arm with a blunt knife. The boys seized him and beat him senseless. It was Albin who first saw the shadow before the other boys did. The lethal shadow that swept down on them and tore them to pieces while they screamed for mercy. But Albin did not resist. He just closed his eyes and prayed to the shadow for a quick, merciful death. The shadow, with a voice that must have belonged to the devil himself, refused. When Albin awoke and opened his eyes again, he was one of the damned. And not only damned, but clanless. Albin did not understand what had happened, not until he met the vampires of Magdeburg. He went from being treated like trash by mortals to being treated like trash by the children of Cain. They ridiculed him for his fear, his habits of feeding on dogs and rats, while they reveled in the blood of mortals. They hung the name of Ghost around his neck like a badge of shame, for he was more a shade than a vampire. When the Ventru Lord Jurgen von Verden arrived in Magdeburg to claim it as his domain, his advisors recommended that he dispose of the wretched caitiff rather than suffer his continued existence. When Jurgen interviewed Albin, the Ventru discovered that Albin had unparalleled knowledge of Magdeburg and the ability to move around unnoticed. Jurgen offered Albin a job as his personal spy. Albin accepted, anticipating the respect and fear he would gain from other vampires. Instead, he was not only scorned for being a caitiff, but for being the prince's snoop. Albin, abused, terrorized, and disrespected, was full of resentment for every vampire in Magdeburg. Even Jurgen treated him like a slave and frequently reminded Albin that his existence depended entirely on Jurgen's mercy. When the Tremere Alexia of Nicosia approached Albin with the promise of power in exchange for betraying Jurgen, Albin jumped at the offer without hesitation. The Tremere, using Albin's information, engineered a diplomatic incident to publicly humiliate Jurgen and to break an alliance between him and the French Toreador. but a coterie of vampires intervened and uncovered the plot, along with Albin's treachery. Jurgen expelled the Tremere from Magdeburg and came within a hair's breadth of calling a blood hunt on Alexia. As for his faithless servant Albin, he had the caitiff chained at the bottom of a well, where he could feed on rats and snakes to his heart's content, until Jurgen came up with a more fitting punishment for the ghost of Magdeburg. Albin would escape the well in 1230. It would be some time before Jurgen realized that Albin was missing. The Ventru lord searched for Albin for several years before giving it up as fruitless. Yet Albin took himself and all of Jurgen's secrets to the one vampire he knew could exact his vengeance on his former master, Jurgen's own sire, Hardestat the Elder. Hardestat would destroy Jurgen in 1271 for his failures. Whether Albin survived the Dark Ages into the modern nights is unknown. Number 9. Stanislav. During the reign of the Trinity in Constantinople, in a city filled with vampires who were powerful, insane, or wicked, one of the most dangerous was a caitiff prophet named Stanislav. Perhaps it was always the caitiff prophet's destiny to burn. In life, he had been a follower of Bogomilism, a neo-Gnostic heresy of the Orthodox Church emerging from Bulgaria. Among the peculiar belief of the Bogomils was the notion that the soul is the creation of God, but the flesh and the material world are the creations of Satan, who was also Michael's elder brother, but became Jesus' elder brother when Jesus was baptized and received the Holy Spirit, which was also Michael. Heresy, the original fan fiction. What made the Bogomils so dangerous was their rejection of iconography and hierarchy. They even took it a step further and accused the Orthodox Church of being an instrument of Satan. Since vampires tend to follow mortals rather than the other way around, Bogomilism found its way among the children of Cain. Their contribution was the notion that Cain was the child of the devil, since Satan seduced Eve, but rather than being the twin of Abel, Cain had a twin sister named Calomena. So what does any of this have to do with Stanislav? He was a Bogomil embraced in the Balkans sometime in 1132 AD. By the 1180s, he journeyed south to Constantinople, right to the heart of the Byzantine Empire by dreams of Calomena. When he arrived in the city, he received visions from Calomena, who told him that vampires were the personification of evil in the flesh and had to be destroyed, except for the caitiff, because it certainly wouldn't make sense to condemn yourself along with the rest of the sinners, now would it? The caitiff were the elect of Calomena, her chosen to prepare the world for her return, a return which would consume the world in purging fire. And that was when Bishop Alfonso, child of the La Sombra Narcissus, the Archbishop of Nod and leader of the Cainite heresy, comes into play. Alfonso was happy to admit Stanislav to the Latin quarter under the Narcissian La Sombra's control, where the Bogomil prophet quickly established a base and went underground. Stanislav spent his nights riling up his mortal and caitiff followers against the demonic vampires of Constantinople, who must be destroyed, and most importantly of all, their evil prince, resting beneath his temple of vanity and sin, the Hagia Sophia, quite possibly Satan himself, the Toreador Methuselah, Michael. Following Stanislav's arrival to Constantinople, amateur witch hunters took up the Calomean call to purge God's enemies with steel and fire. In a true example of being hoist by one's own petard, the same La Sombra who welcomed and protected Stanislav when he first arrived suffered most at the hands of his faithful mobs. The Venetians quickly declared an anathema on Stanislav, but he and his followers were too skilled at hiding among the masses. In 1204 AD, during the sack of Constantinople, Stanislav led the chosen of Calomena through the city, setting fire to buildings he knew to be havens of other vampires, and marched on the Hagia Sophia. He believed that Calomena's return was imminent, and that she would reward him for lighting the pyre of the chief devil, Michael, with his own hand. But Stanislav did not survive the night, as he was engulfed by the same fires he had set long before reaching the Hagia Sophia. Number 8. Count Zaroff. Let's revisit a really old-school vampire, and I'm talking first edition vampire old, back when White Wolf was as shameless about ripping from other sources as Games Workshop. Depending on when you went to high school, you've likely read The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, the story of Sanger Ransford, a New York big game hunter who fell off a boat and washed up on the shore of an island belonging to an expatriate Cossack noble named Count Zaroff. Zaroff, like Rainsford, is a big game hunter, but was so good that he had gotten bored of hunting mere animals and has turned to the titular most dangerous game, man. Zaroff introduced Rainsford to his game. Elude Zaroff for 3 days and gain his freedom. Lose and be fed to Zaroff's dogs. Refuse and be beaten to death by Zaroff's giant deaf-mute manservant, Ivan. The vampire Count Zaroff was born in 1893 and embraced in 1941 by a vampire of unknown clan named Arab Halua. Like the earlier literary Count Zaroff, the vampire, in life, hunted until the sport bored him, and then took to hunting other big game hunters he lured to his island estate in the Pacific, rather than the Caribbean. When the authorities discovered Zaroff's game, he disappeared. It is likely that during this period he was embraced and abandoned by his sire. In the early 1940s, Zaroff reappeared in Europe. Despite being pretty fresh from the embrace, he showed no respect for the elders and often challenged them to physical contests. As in mortal life, Count Zaroff liked to hunt, but as a vampire, the hunting of mortals became mundane, trivial, and even boring. Since discovering that there was a higher rung on the food chain, guess what Count Zaroff started hunting? Since his creation, Zaroff has had the blood hunt called on him in nearly every domain in Europe. Count Zaroff is occasionally accused of being the mastermind behind the notorious Hunt Club originating in Great Britain. The Hunt Club is comprised of young vampires who identify, hunt down, and diablerize elder vampires. During the 50 years that Mithras, the Prince of London, was missing, his successor, Queen Anne Bolesley, declared that membership in the Hunt Club was a capital offense. Zaroff was last seen in West Berlin in 1982, when he was expelled from that city by its prince, Wilhelm Waldberg. Number 7. Caroline Bishops. Caroline was just one of thousands of teenage runaways who thought she could escape from a terrible home onto the streets of New York. But the streets are always on the lookout for unwary young girls to chew up and spit out. Caroline didn't even notice the yellow van following her with its lights off, and she didn't even have time to run when the door opened and she was dragged inside. Her pimps kept her high for months, while a seemingly endless stream of Johns broke her in. After Caroline was well and truly hooked on the needle, her pimps tossed her back out onto the street to get her own customers, in exchange for the drugs they always had in supply. Street walking is a dangerous trade, ducking cops, avoiding pimps on the lookout for new talent, and willing to slice up anyone cutting into their money, and other hookers running girls off of their corner. Caroline was infected with several venereal diseases and got pregnant. When she was sold to her sire, she was too high to care. She only had a dim memory of a filthy room and a doctor wearing a surgical mask. His hands and fingers seemed to melt and twist into a variety of scalpels and blades. The last thing she remembered before she emerged from a Sabbat grave was the doctor, spreading her legs and peering inside of her. When she arose from the creation rites, she was taken in by a New York-based Sabbat pack called the Mattachine. The Mattachine were under orders to protect Caroline, though who gave the order, Caroline never learned. She became stronger under the Mattachine's protection and tutelage, though she preferred to keep company mainly with women and feed exclusively from them. In 1993, Caroline's torpor was disturbed by nightmares of the doctor. She occasionally awoke from her slumber in a near frenzy and had to be watched until she regained her senses. The nightmares also featured the floating faces of children. Caroline believed that the shepherds of Cain could help her, fix her, do anything about her nightmares. The Mattachine were reluctant to let her go to Montreal, but Sebastian Goulet, leader of the Queens of Mercy Pack, an offshoot of the Mattachine, agreed to look after her. Since her arrival in Montreal, Caroline has befriended Celeste Lamontagne, a country gangrel who is a member of both the Shepherds of Cain and the Navigators. Caroline believes that her sire had some skill at vicissitude, and fears that, despite her undead state, the doctor somehow impregnated her with something horrible. She hasn't told anyone about her suspicions, not even her friend Celeste. Number 6. Amethyst. Clarice Washington was born in the ghettos of Baltimore, Maryland in 1911. By the age of 15, she was out on the streets, working the corners to keep herself fed. One night, in 1928, at the age of 17, she was attacked by a stranger who was more interested in chewing on her neck than what was in her purse or under her skirt. When Clarice woke several hours later, she had a pounding headache and felt as if she was dying of hunger and thirst at the same time. But she heard something past the pain, a sound that moved rhythmically, steadily, slowly. She saw the bum sleeping nearby and crawled over to him. She saw the vein in his neck and her hunger grew. It was just a little skin between her and the warm, rich blood she suddenly craved. She bit down on his neck savagely and drained him of his life. Clarice adapted to being a vampire with surprising ease. She had always been smart and tough, and it was only a matter of time before she crossed paths with other vampires, and a little more time after that until she learned who was important and who wasn't. When Clarice was introduced to the Prince of Baltimore, she knew exactly what to do and what to say. Soon after, she became the prince's consort. Proximity to power is power, after all, and Clarice used her proximity to make a comfortable existence for herself, though being the prince's favorite did make her a target. A group of East Coast anarchs managed to kidnap Clarice and planned to hold her hostage until the prince met their demands. When the prince heard that Clarice had been captured, he laughed and said that since the anarchs had gone to such trouble to acquire her, they were welcome to keep her. Following the prince's betrayal, Clarice swore never again to trust any prince, or anyone else for that matter, other than herself. Fueled by the desire for revenge, Clarice made her own deal with the anarchs. Freedom, and in exchange, she would lead them straight to the prince. With Clarice at their head, the anarchs slipped into the prince's haven and destroyed him. The anarchs had hoped that their assassination would spark a larger revolt in Baltimore. Instead, the Primogen brought all of the force they could bear down on the anarchs. Clarice fled west to escape the elders' revenge. When she reached Denver, Colorado, Clarice changed her name to Amethyst and laid low, aware of just how long the Camarilla's reach is. In 1944, she heard that the anarchs had deposed the Prince of Los Angeles, Don Sebastian, and figured it would be as good a place as any for a clever vampire like her to make a name for herself. Amethyst arrived in Santa Ana, the second largest city in Orange County and less than an hour south of Los Angeles. But Santa Ana already had an anarch baron. Amethyst bided her time and gathered her own forces. In 1960, she attacked the baron, eliminated him and his gang, and took Santa Ana for herself. Amethyst survived the Sabbat attack on the Anarch Free States and had designs on becoming Prince of Los Angeles in her own right. She first planned to usurp the barony of Anaheim and from there seize Los Angeles itself. However, her plan hit a snag when the anarchs were attacked by the Kuei Jin, and then betrayed by Salvador Garcia and Louis Fortier. Her fate following the return of the Camarilla and the downfall of Prince Sebastian Lacroix are unknown. Number 5. Maldavis. In 1980, Carol Davis was out at a jazz club. It was an ordinary night like any other, when she caught a glance at a man sitting alone in a corner table. She knew in an instant who he was, Abraham DuSable, her great-uncle. She had seen pictures of him in an old family photo, but the family always said that he had been killed over 60 years ago by the Ku Klux Klan. Yet, here he was, looking no older than he had in the photographs. Carol spent most of the night watching him, trying to solve the mystery in her own mind. When her friends left her for the night, she walked over to his table where he was lost in the music. She told him who she was and was met with a blank, curious stare. But the mask of bewilderment slipped, briefly, to a look of horrified panic when she told him who he was. DuSable quickly and quietly promised to explain everything to her if she followed him outside, right now. You know, it's never a good idea to follow your vampire uncle into a darkened alley when you just found out he faked his own death. In that moment, DuSable was panicked and on the edge of frenzy. He was one of the Tremere, and if he was suspected of having breached the masquerade, even accidentally, he would lose all important status within the clan, and possibly face the wrath of Prince Loden. The beast broke free of his control. DuSable sunk his fangs into Carol's exposed neck, drinking her blood faster than he had ever consumed anyone's. When he regained his senses, he was gripped by revulsion and guilt. He slit his wrist. A single drop of his vitae fell past Carol's lips. Abraham DuSable then fled into the night, leaving his great niece to her fate. But curiosity didn't kill this particular cat. Carol was too weak to even move as dawn approached, but a caitiff by the name of Richard Fulker, or Dickie as he was known, had been watching DuSable, trying to gather information on the Tremere manipulations in New York. Dickie dragged Carol away from the first rays of the sun. The next night, Carol, still in a shocked haze, told Dickie everything she knew about DuSable. He took Carol under his wing and showed her the ropes as a vampire in Chicago. Carol then changed her name to Maldavis. Maldavis adapted to unlife in Chicago surprisingly quickly. Of course, this was due to the fact that she had been chosen by two of the Primogen, Annabelle Triabel of Clan Toreador and Critias of Clan Bruja, as their pawn in a power struggle against Prince Lodin. Maldavis manifested several potent abilities, thanks to secretly being given draughts of their potent elder blood. Of course, with blood comes control, and it took only the smallest nudge for the elders to influence Maldavis and stoke her ire at how Prince Lodin treated both the caitiffs and anarchs of Chicago. Dickie and his lover Valerie had tried to organize the anarchs after Lodin had nearly wiped them out. But now, Maldavis, with the support of Annabelle and Critias, was able to form a veritable army of anarchs and a web of mortal pawns powerful enough to threaten Lodin's rule. Lodin didn't realize just how far Maldavis' influence spread until Harold Lee Washington was elected mayor of Chicago in 1983. The prince panicked and, against the admonition of the Primogen, declared all-out war against Maldavis and her anarchs. For 4 years, Maldavis seemed unstoppable. She neutralized Lodin's mortal pawns in the city government, while her anarchs destroyed Lodin's base of kindred supporters. Finally, in 1987, Lodin, fearful of losing his seat and, more importantly, his head, pleaded with the Primogen for support. He conceded to grant them certain rights he had denied them before, and to heed their complaints going forward. By a 4-3 vote, the Primogen agreed to support Lodin once again, and it was at that moment that Annabelle and Critias got what they wanted, and Maldavis' little rebellion had just outlived its usefulness. Then the tide of war shifted. Harold Lee Washington died that year under mysterious circumstances, attributed to heart failure. Maldavis' mortal forces were either scandalized, bribed, or killed. During the Thanksgiving Massacre of 1987, her anarchs were destroyed during the day and hunted by night. As quickly as she had rose, Maldavis fell from power and was forced to flee for her life. The 1993 War of Chicago was a blessing for Maldavis. It killed Lodin and weakened the Primogen. Now the Chicago anarch has emerged from hiding and begins to piece together another anarch movement from the battered remnants of the Thanksgiving Massacre in the War of Chicago. Meanwhile, the Bruja Methuselah Menele wonders if there is still a few moves left in his caitiff pawn in his eternal war against Helena. Number 4. Alfred Benezri. If you've listened to my previous videos on the top 10 vampires of Clan Bruja, La Sombre, and the followers of Set, I've given some information on the Sabbat city of Montreal and why you would have to be a complete and utter moron to want to be in charge of it. Well, let's look at the current Archbishop of Montreal, for however long that lasts, Alfred Benezri, also leader of the Shepherds of Cain and co-founder of the modern Sabbat Inquisition. Benezri was born sometime in the 18th century in Syria. In 1769, while in Damascus, he was embraced by a mysterious figure calling himself Moraye. Moraye claimed to be a missionary of the Shepherds of Cain. When Moraye fell afoul of the Muslim vampire sect known as the Ashira, Benezri fled his homeland, following the trail of his sire's pack all the way to a settlement in New France called Montreal. There he met Saint Ignace, then leader of the Shepherds. After telling Ignace his tale, Benezri was reluctantly accepted as a student, despite his Sunni Muslim heritage, which was out of step with the Jesuit-inspired theology of the Shepherds and the path of nocturnal redemption. Since his admission, a host of Sabbat of other religions have joined the Shepherds. After the sainting of Ignace, the original leader, Benezri suggested a system of rotating leadership between himself, Frere Mark, and Yitzhak. He also formed the current Sabbat Inquisition with the help of Julian, a dominion of the Black Hand. Their actions led to the death of Soeur Jeanne, a fellow shepherd and leader of the original Sabbat Inquisition, but allowed the organization to survive the First Sabbat Civil War. Benezri served as a judge inquisitor from 1964 to 1981, and then as a night inquisitor from 1981 to 1993. It was during this time that he met, investigated, acquitted, and then recruited the Toreador anti-tribu, Mercy. His time away from Montreal proved to be something of a blessing, as he was not present when the shepherds supported the reign of Sangris the Serpent, protecting him from the political backlash that struck many of the other shepherds when Sangris was exposed as an infernalist. Benezri was put in an awkward position. He would have preferred to continue following his path of enlightenment, yet with the death of Sangris and the controversial rule of Carolina Velez, he was the only viable candidate for Archbishop that the Montreal Sabbat would accept. But in 1998, things spiraled quickly out of control when Benezri's former pupil, now Night Inquisitor in her own right, Mercy, came and tore through Montreal like Cain's own wrath. Archbishop Velez pleaded with the shepherds to intervene on her behalf with Mercy, but Benezri refused. When Mercy charged Velez with heresy, Benezri had the leverage he needed to become Archbishop. He gave Velez a choice: surrender Montreal to him or take her chances with Mercy. Velez agreed to his terms without hesitation, desperate to protect herself and her granddaughter, Josefina. Mercy seethed as Benezri acted as Velez's defendant in her trial, but in the end, Velez was judged not guilty. Benezri won the archdiocese with a monomacy duel, staged to avoid any rumors of the bargain they had struck. Then Velez retired to serve as abbot of the Temple of Eternal Whispers, the Montreal Sabbat's communal haven. Number 3. Mukhtar Bey. Mukhtar Bey was born sometime in the 14th century in Egypt, to the Bahari dynasty of the Mamluks. The Mamluks were a caste of slave soldiers introduced to Egypt by Saladin a century earlier during the Crusades. The Mamluks were able to take power after the Seventh Crusade, when the last Ayyubid Sultan and his heir died. Mukhtar Bey was embraced in 1354 by a vampire known only as the wife of the tiger and the snake. In 1365, Mukhtar Bey presented himself to the Sultan of Cairo, the boy king Antonius. When Antonius's guards tried to throw Bey out for his impertinence, the Mamluks slaughtered them all and repeated his request. Antonius was so impressed by the display that he not only accepted Bey into his domain, he made him his royal guard to replace those Bey had unceremoniously dispatched. The rumors immediately started. Some said that the Sultan made a simple, pragmatic decision to curry the favor of a personally powerful vampire rather than risk his enmity. Others claimed that the move was political. Bey was a means of influencing the Mamluk rulers, and that Antonius, by taking Bey into his confidence, showed that a Ventru could be merciful. The truth was that Antonius, despite his considerable age, remained an Eromenos at heart. That is to say, he craved the attention and, let's just say affection, of a strong male figure. He had been Emperor Hadrian's lover, and saw something of his own sire, the venerable Antonius of Constantinople, in Mukhtar Bey. Yet the strength he perceived in Bey failed when the Sultan needed it most. During the Night of Long Knives, when the werewolves attacked the Sultan's Kita, Bey's will broke as well. Bey fled the palace in a panic and left the Sultan Antonius to the mercy of the lupines, who are generally not known to be merciful to creatures they consider tainted. Bey was, and still is, plagued by Antonius's death screams. He had hoped to slip away from Cairo and disappear, to be left alone with his shame, but the other vampires of Cairo found him and begged him to lead them. Bey reluctantly accepted, hoping that they would see the error of choosing him in time, or that a more worthy vampire would reveal himself and he could escape the constant reminder of his failure. It was not meant to be. For 500 years, Mukhtar Bey has reigned as Prince of Cairo, though it has not been without its trials. He has had to contend with incursions by the followers of Set, the Assamites, the Sabbat, the Giovanni, and the werewolves of the Bonar tribe. Bey managed to repay the werewolves for Antonius's death in part. On January 26, 1952, using the Black Saturday riots as cover, Bey and his allies managed to assassinate several Bonars, though he returned their bodies to their packmates. Well, most of their bodies. A wolf hunter must have some trophies after all. Not only is Mukhtar Bey surrounded by treachery and gripped by shame, but he is also consumed by fear. He knows what is said about him, that a clanless ruler of a city is one of the signs of Gehenna and the return of the antediluvians. Mukhtar Bey knows himself, and he knows that if faced with the grandsires of the clans, his will would fail him once again, just as it did with Antonius. So when Al-Muntakim, one of the true Bruja, came to him with a means to escape the judgment of the antediluvians, Mukhtar Bey leapt at it. Al-Muntakim, the avenger, told Bey that the antediluvians could be appeased by a sacrifice. The blood of every single caitiff in Cairo would convince the blood-hungry ancients to spare the one who made the generous offering. Mukhtar Bey since that meeting has opened Cairo to all caitiff and given them a kita of their own on the island of Gezira and a seat on the consultative council. Many caitiff who dwell in Cairo believe they have it made, that Cairo is the promised land of the caitiff. The princes and lords of the Camarilla are more than happy to send Mukhtar Bey what they consider to be their trash. The Sabbat, given that the entire reason for their existence is supposedly the fighting and slaying of the antediluvians, and their familiarity with Nahdi's lore, have had their eyes on Mukhtar Bey for centuries, and his move to make Cairo a caitiff sanctuary has aroused their suspicions. As for the caitiff of Cairo, they love their prince, and they believe he loves them in kind. But then, the lamb also believes the shepherd loves him, right before the shepherd puts the lamb on the altar and cuts his throat. The caitiff are Mukhtar Bey's lambs, the sacrifice he will use to buy his life from the ravenous antediluvians. Meanwhile, Al-Muntakim uses Mukhtar Bey's fear to exact his long-awaited vengeance against the murderers of his sire and his clan. Number 2. Joseph Pander. Saul Alinsky wrote in 1972, for Playboy magazine appropriately, "No issue can be negotiated unless you first have the clout to compel negotiation." Alinsky was talking about organizing in radical politics, but it is a sentiment that Joseph Pander would probably agree with. And for one moment in the history of the Sabbat, Pander had the clout, and he used it to force the Sabbat to grant the caitiff equal status to the anti-tribu, the La Sombra, and the Tzimisce, at least in theory. Joseph Pander's mortal life and most of his career as a vampire are unknown. To understand his importance requires a little backstory on caitiff in the Sabbat. In the Camarilla, the caitiff, when they aren't being destroyed outright, are pushed off to the margins of a prince's domain. Caitiff don't get the table scraps, they get the dust from the table. The Sabbat caitiff are only slightly better off. First, the Sabbat created more caitiff than the Camarilla thanks to its early creation rites. Back when the Sabbat-Camarilla War ran hot, an entire pack would give its blood to a shovelhead. This not only increased the chances of the embrace's success, but had the effect of creating a kind of proto-vinculum, a shared blood bond, in the fledgling before they even took their first real Valdery. But with all of that vitae mixed up, no particular clan traits or curse took hold, giving you a new, bouncing baby caitiff. The La Sombra put a stop to this when the war ended, and they realized that if they kept it up, they would end up knee-deep in caitiff. The La Sombra already hate ghouls, and a caitiff is only slightly better as far as they are concerned. The Sabbat regarded their caitiff as cannon fodder for the most part, and if said cannon fodder managed to survive and prove their worth, they might join or even lead a pack. But basically, their job was to soak up bullets for the quote-unquote real vampires. Pander had been active in the Sabbat for some time. It was rumored that he had been quietly killing Sabbat moderates in La Sombra for years. He began laying the groundwork for a Sabbat caitiff clan in the early 1950s, after the La Sombra had massacred 30 caitiff in Cincinnati. Pander quietly gathered support from like-minded caitiff within the sect, both from the status quo and loyalist factions. In 1957, the Third Sabbat Civil War broke out in New York. Interestingly enough, it was said by a Sabbat, who is now dead, that the first La Sombra killed in the short war died at the hands of Joseph Pander himself. Without delving too deep into the Third Sabbat Civil War, some uppity bourgeois, as always the source of political strife among vampires, demanded a greater voice in the Sabbat, as well as permission to attack Camarilla cities. The Lasombra and Zamitzi pointed out that they were not only proper clans and not mere anti-tribu, but they made up half of the entire sect and outnumbered the Bruja anti-tribu by 10 to 1, and that was a conservative estimate. The Bruja gave it their usual calm consideration and started shooting. Joseph Pander and his crew quickly joined in. Now, the Third Sabbat Civil War lasted only 100 days, but in that time the population of New York Sabbat was cut in half. After some false starts, the two sides sat down at the bargaining table, and here's where the magic happened. One of the Sabbat status quo, after some back and forth, suggested, entirely of his own volition, to recognize the Caitiff as a clan, with all of the attendant rights and privileges. This suited the Bruja, who were convinced that the Caitiff were on their side as fellow rebels. And it suited the Lasombra and Zamitzi, who were convinced that the Caitiff, soon to be Panders, would split the anti-tribu to assert their own interests. But to sweeten the point, Joseph Pander was appointed as a Priscus of the Sabbat, giving him official title without shackling him to any one location, leaving him free to rally and organize the Caitiff throughout the Sabbat, later adopting the name Panders in his honor. The Panders hold other Caitiff outside of the sect in contempt, but Joseph's success ignited the imaginations of other Caitiff, at least temporarily. In 1973, a group of Caitiff led by one called Alexei Darba marched on the conclave of the Camarillas' inner circle and demanded that they recognize the Caitiff as a clan in their own right. Big mistake. Darba and her coterie were never seen again. Meanwhile, Joseph Pander had the right amount of clout, at the right place, at the right time. Whether he turns the Panders into a force to be reckoned with or allows them to remain second-class vampires in the Sabbat remains to be seen. Number 1. The Stoneman. The Stoneman is the subject of more rumor than real information. He is alleged to be the oldest Caitiff in existence. His generation is unknown. The few vampires who have seen him in action claim that he is exceptionally powerful and has access to several disciplines unique to him, disciplines which he has occasionally instructed other Caitiff in. The discipline of kineticism is said to have been developed by the Stoneman. He is verifiably several centuries old. Witnesses have attested to his participation in the Anarch Revolt. Again, second-hand information, but the Stoneman has disturbingly accurate information about Carthage and the events before, during, and after its destruction. Some vampires, Camarilla and Sabbat, dismiss the Stoneman as a kind of Caitiff urban legend, a messianic figure to compensate for the Caitiff's obvious inferiority and weakness, a benevolent dispenser of protection and power to distract from the harsh truth that they are not true vampires. But some Caitiff claim that he is one of the Incanu, or that Joseph Pander is his child. Pander himself vehemently denies that last one. The wilder claim surrounding the Stoneman is that he has successfully diablerized an antediluvian, or that he is one of the second or third generation himself, returned from a long pilgrimage in the East. Whatever the truth is about the Stoneman, he does watch over the Caitiff, and occasionally intervenes on their behalf when they are being abused by other vampires. And those were the top 10 Caitiff vampires. The Caitiff had potential as a concept in the world of darkness other than as downtrodden underclass, something that White Wolf seemed obsessed to include in every single game line in some form. Caitiff had more potential than White Wolf wrote for them, in my opinion. Take the Panders, for example. I would have had them lean hard into the idea of Caitiff as not only the harbingers of Gehenna, but as its warriors. I would have had some Pander develop the Withering from the Gehenna sourcebook as a discipline, and then teach it to other Panders. It would allow the Panders to either render some quantity of vampire vitae inert and unusable on touch, or at high level and with enough Panders, project the Withering at close range to temporarily raise the generation of a vampire by the number of successes on some given dice roll. Even if you raised an antediluvian from the third to the fourth or even fifth generation, it greatly improves the odds of the players being able to put one of them down. If the Panders managed to knock down even a Methuselah or two with the Withering, the antediluvians suddenly realize, oh crap, these Caitiff could actually cause us a problem, and then direct the jihad at the Caitiff and Panders, either to subvert or destroy them. Then the Caitiffs suddenly go from being the helpless appetizers of the antediluvians to being able to potentially tip the balance of Gehenna. That is, assuming Cain just doesn't show up and go, I win, you lose. And now I'm brainstorming rather than doing lore. My bad. Anyway, the next video will be on one of the two extinct clans destroyed during the Dark Ages. Clan Cappadocian. It might be 10 vampires, it might not be. We'll see. Until next time.